So hello, today I'm at St John and St Giles Church in Great Easton in Essex, and I'd like to talk to you about the history of the church and the village itself. So Great Easton is a village in Essex. It's 2 miles from Great Dunmow and 1 mile from Little Easton. The village is surrounded by Essex farmland and the elevation here is 80 metres. The village overlooks the Chelmer Valley with the river Chelmer. Today's population is around 1,000. Now, Great Easton, you get the feeling this small hilltop settlement has been this way for a long time indeed. It was called a Staines, which translates to the island of stones, way back before the Normans came here in 1066. East to St John's Church are the remains of a 12th century moat and bailey. Excavations in 1964 revealed Saxon occupation. Incredibly old. You can just about make the outline of it out now. Now, Great and Little Easton were one settlement in 1066. 86 households, and a seriously large settlement at that. The land was divided into 4 manors, and there were 4 thanes here. There was Archie the Dane, Doding, Dove, and a freeman. Now Archie the Dane's manor was powerful and wealthy. 15 villagers, 16 smallholders, and 9 slaves. The most I've seen of any manor, and 1 priest. Now Archie the Dane owned 3 manors and he served the Danish kings and Edward the Confessor. He was a real survivor. I also read that this manor had a mill, probably powered by a stream, and 3 beehives, a sign of great wealth indeed. A short walk down from the top of the hill where the church is, we find the old stream, and I guess this is where the mill would have been. Now Doding's manor was almost a mirror image of Archie the Dane's, for it also had a mill, beehives, a priest, but only 1 slave. The 4 manors across Easton's would have been a hive of activity with 762 pigs, multiple plough teams, sheep and goats. I found the old village pump halfway up the hill. Now in 1086, Great Easton's manor would be taken over by Matthew of Montaigne, the Norman. He was both lord and tenant-in-chief, giving him complete authority here. By 1194 the lordship was passed on to William de Clinton, for William would also serve King Richard I in person. His was the king's lardiner to stop poison entering the royal kitchen. Now William de Clinton would be at King Richard's second coronation at Westminster Cathedral in 1194. Richard himself just returning from the Third Crusade of the Holy Land. Richard the Lionheart, as he was known, would live another 5 years. He'd be at war in France. In 1199 he was shot by a crossbow bolt. Richard would die in his mother's arms, and before he died Richard would reward the young lad who fired the bolt with silver. Later his men would flay alive the lad for killing their king. Richard's heart was buried in Rouen, his entrails in Chevalis, where he fell, and his body in the Abbey of Angers, all in France. In 1232 the Bishop of Rochester said he had seen a vision of Richard descending to heaven, so ending his 33 years of purgatory. Great Easton's manor would pass from family to family for the next 400 years until we have Charles Stoughton, the 8th Baron, who was then executed for his part in a murder. The judge reminded Stoughton at his trial he would be pressed to death under heavy stones if he did not change his plea. Now the Crown would own Easton's manor, and by 1597 it would be signed over to Oliver Cromwell Esquire, father to Oliver Cromwell himself, Lord Protector of England. And a little side note to add, Oliver Cromwell would stay often at the Saracen's Head Inn at nearby Great Dunmow, so I guess he would stop here to visit his father. It's a fascinating history. Now we've moved back down the hill on Endway Road. We now face a pub, the Swan. It's only 70 metres from the church. It still has traces of its 1400 structure. Once a house with a main hall and crosswings. The Swan Inn was sold at auction just a year ago. And what stories these old walls could tell. Now going back centuries, the church sexton at St John's would ring the bells midday on a Sunday. The church warden would then enter the Swan Inn, carrying the church wand, and clear out the drinkers. Today the tradition continues in a way. The barman rings the bell. Last orders, gentlemen, last orders. Now Essex in the 16th and 17th centuries was famous for its witch trials, its witches and its witch finders. Regular trials taking place in Brentwood, Chelmsford and Colchester, and no woman was safe in this time. Only 2 miles away in Great Dunmow in 1567, Alice Press Mary, the wife of John, is said to have bewitched Edward Parker, the son of Robert the Tanner. Alice pleaded not guilty and received 1 year in Colchester's castle dungeon, along with 6 hours in the town pillory every 4 months for good measure. Alice would die of the Black Death whilst in prison. You can imagine how the news would have reached here. You will see today many fine timber framed houses with ornamental plasterwork. It was introduced by Henry VIII, who imported Italian plasterers, the craft being known as pargeting. You will see many houses in Great Easton keeping this art alive. Now Clerk's office opposite the north wall, where we're going to look at now. The cottage was given to the parish in 1761 by Lord Charles Manors of Great Easton. The clerk living here would be a schoolmaster and teach 6 poor boys in reading, writing and common arithmetic. Now if we pan around, we have this pink house. Now this was Great Easton's maternity home, known locally as the Garth. Originally it was 2 houses bought by the wealthy Evelyn Duncombe. Her father was the Dean of York Minster. In 1897 it was a maternity home, and by 1909 it would become St Michael and All Angels Home for Children and Invalids, run by Sister Francis. So moving right forward to 2022, we have very interesting business. In Great Easton we have a Rolls-Royce and Bentley heritage dealers. So I'm standing in front of the village hall at Great Easton, and I notice there's no library here as such, but not a problem, because the library actually comes and stops here. The only other place I've seen this in Essex so far is Pagglesham. It's a very good idea. Now we've finally made our way to St John and St Giles' church, looking at it from the east side. So we're now in November and it's a bit of a wet week this week, but fairly mild. Now the walls are of flint and pebble rubble, most likely off these fields. We've got Roman bricks and tiles, and we'll look at those later. The dressings are of limestone and clunch is a hard chalk. So we're now looking at the west wall, which is 12th century and we've got a 15th century window just above the doorway. And you can see a huge amount of Roman brick, which you'll have a look at. So just about all the brick that we can see, apart from what's above the doorway, is Roman. So there must have been some sort of villa here, surely. Now the clock's history is totally unknown to me. Now the present brick tower is only 1928. We've got 6 bells, which we'll talk about later. And if you look, you can above in the tower where the bell chamber is, you can see the black headers making the crosses. I guess that's of St Andrews, and that is a typical thing to do from the Tudor periods. It's a copy. Now we're looking at the south porch. Now up until 1928 access was through the west wall where we've just looked. This porch was actually the vestry then. Now there used to be a wall and a chimney where the entrance is today. And now let us go in. A small handle. We should shut the door. Now this roof has 15th century cambered and moulded tie beams and moulded braces. Now we're looking at the south doorway. Look at these original and unusual 12th century columns and scalloped capitals. And I read by the south doorway there's a sign here which is a tragic tale of a man that was actually murdered and found handless in 1830. Okay, let us go into this lovely old church. So I shall put my cap down. We shall pan around as usual and look at the south entrance. So we're now inside the nave and it measures 55 feet by 25 feet. It is entirely 12th century. Now the nave narrows towards the east end and we'll see that soon. Now as you enter we have the lists of rectors that were here for St Giles, St John, Great Easton. Now I read that a rector here in 1320 was accused of breaking the gates and doors and windows of a house in Sawbridgeworth. And this was of a parson and king's clerk. Be interesting to know why. So that will be Tresmond de Ferrington, I guess. Sorry, my mistake, that'll be Henry de Newburgh. Now, directly in front of you as you enter, you'll see a hatchment. This is to Charles Maynard, Baron of Easton, and 6th Lord Maynard of 1775. It's divided into 4 quarters. It shows 5 generations of the Maynard family that are remembered. Now, the funeral hatchment was generally placed at a deceased person's residence, and then it was brought into the church where it stands today. So from 1775, that's been in here. Now on the north wall we look at a recess, and I've had no idea of the purpose of this, but I'm curious. But originally this church was built in a cruciform shape, so above it would make the crucifix. Both the north and south transepts have long gone, so it may well be connected to that. Now we're looking at the north window. This is a memorial window to Constance Margaret Chapel of 1973. Now we should look at this small brass here. This memorial brass remembers Sidney Bass, who died in World War I in Belgium at the start of the war in 1914. He sang here in this choir, and we're very close to the Remembrance Sunday that remembers all the millions that did not come back. So next to the brass memorial we can see a stone memorial. This memorial is to the Jackson Esquires. There were 3 of them, and a widow Mary. Now, an esquire was a landed gentry who was above a gentleman of high social standing, but he was below a knight. Now if we pan around, before we go into the chancel, we've got this lovely board which remembers Her Majesty the Queen II. And it reads, the pupils of Great Easton Primary School learned all about Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II and her incredible reign. And they've all had a go at painting or drawing a picture of the Queen. It's nice. And we've got a tree which is, you can add a prayer for somebody. So we're now looking at the chancel, which measures 34 feet by 22 feet. It's 13th century. Now, if we look above the chancel, we've got the beam rood screen. From 1899, it shows Jesus with his mother Mary and John the Baptist. Now, this was restored in 2015. Now, Mary, she would stay with Elizabeth for 3 months when John the Baptist was born. It's about 100 miles between their homes. John was to be named Zachariah after his father, but Elizabeth said no. He's to be called John, she said. I like the way she put her foot down. We should look at the north window. This window is by Clayton Bell of London, dedicated to Sue St Anna. Now, I did not know this, but Anna was the mother of Mary and maternal grandmother of Jesus. She's the patron saint to mothers and pregnant women. Now we're going to pan around to the south wall. Well, we have another window. Now I'm guessing this is St Peter, Sancti Petrus. Now this is also by Clayton Bell of London. Now their workshop was one of the most prolific stained glass shops during the 19th and 20th centuries. Their windows can be found in King's College, Cambridge, Westminster Hall, London, and they did mosaics, which are at the Albert Memorial in London. Let's have a closer look. Great legacy they left behind to us with their stained glass windows. So next to St Peter's window we have a memorial to Horatio Blarden Capel, who was a rector here for 41 years. He was also godson to Sir Blarden Capel, the captain, at the Battle of Trafalgar. Can you imagine that? Now, Horatio Capel was known as the fighting parson of Great Easton, for he was in fact a champion boxer in the Navy. When he was here as a parson, he would be challenged by the village blacksmith. And so the rector Capel said, "Let's fight it out and the best man will be the winner." And you can guess the rest. And they became the best of friends long after. Now the good Reverend Capel would do much for the community here, and he raised much money and restoration for this old church. Now we should walk past the altar rails, go up to the high altar. Now above the high altar we have the east window. This was commissioned by the Countess of Warwick, known to her friends as Daisy. She would convert Great Dunmo's lockup into a soup kitchen for the poor and provide venison from her lands, just a mile from here in Little Easton. It's a very detailed window, and I can imagine the Countess pondering over a catalogue of what you can have on these windows in the Victorian period. It's a story, isn't it? Fantastic. Now we should pan around to the north window. You can tell I like my windows. The north window in Latin says Maria Bacta Virgo, which means Maria Blessed Virgin. Now the great thing with Google, your translator, you can type in just about any language to any language. So I can type in Latin into English. Might not be 100% correct, but it's pretty good. Yep, and you guessed it, if I pan around, we've got the south window. Which simply says Sanctus Johannes, John the Baptist. You can imagine what this would be like if the sun was to shine directly on this window. Now we're looking at a beautiful oak altar table. Stunning, isn't it? It is easy to overlook the carvings the craftsmen put into these works. Now we're looking at Great Easton's reredos, the altar screen. Considerable restoration took place in the church between 1899 to 1928. And it says the carved oak altar screen called a reredos. It's got 12 painted panels depicting the 12 apostles. These were added in 1912, dedicated in December of that year. Said that the entire cost was borne by the rector and the parishioners. The screen was renovated again in 1995 by craftsman Siegfried Peusch, who actually stayed with a local resident while he undertook the work. Wow, amazing. It's a central panel. And the right panel. You see the decoration goes right down to the floor. Now I did notice an antique tree on the floor. It's probably the oldest part of the church. Couldn't tell you what it is. Now in front of us we're looking at the small oak sedilia, which is 2 chairs. It's in memory of Jack Souch of the RAF, who died in action on the 8th of September 1941. Now we're looking at this flag, which was the base flag for the RAF at Hannington, where young Jack Smith flew his missions from. It was presented by the base commander. So now we shall walk into the tower itself. Just not past we'll talk about the font as well. So this is a full immersion font, so you can place a baby in there. And it is made of stone and was acquired in 1899, so it's a fairly new one. It was carved, the top actually, the cover. So the cover was carved from English elm by Barry Dawson of Suffolk. And it was presented by Mr. and Mrs. F. J. Wall. So we've got an organ above you as you come in, which is quite an unusual place to have it. Look at this old door surround. Let's enter. These old pine doors. So now we're standing under the belfry. So by 1460 the bells here were first mentioned. The tower had been removed and a timber cupola was erected above. By 1899 the cupola was removed as it was rotten, and the present brick tower was built in 1928. In October 1928 all 6 bells were rehung here. Now we have the oldest, 1460, a Henry Jordan bell. It's one of the oldest bell founders in England. Henry would cast bells during the reign of Henry VII and Edward IV for 26 years. We have a 1665 John Hodgson. He made 3 bells for here. John would cast 93 bells from his foundry at Bishopsgate in London. Now it's remarkable that these bells were cast in this year of 1665, as the Great Plague of London killed a quarter of all London's folk. Or 1,000 per day. Now Christopher Hodgson, his son, would take over the business only 4 years later and cast bells for 27 years. The family business must have witnessed the Great Fire of London in 1666 as well. And it was just outside where the fire stopped. 87 churches were destroyed, so Hodgson's must have been very busy casting bells. Now we have a 1928 John Taylor and Co. of Loughborough. They cast 2 bells here. Now this bell foundry has cast 25,000 bells for 100 different countries, and today is the last major bell foundry in England. A museum is open for its workshop visits in Loughborough, so it's probably worth a visit if you're up that end. And here we have a bell from that period. You can actually hear the clock mechanism ticking. Lovely signatures. 1750. And on the wall they've got pictures of the bell ringers. You can actually sense the history here at this part of the building for the bells. And I couldn't help but read the menu that it looks like it's in the local pub. Salmon with tomato sauce, potatoes and salad, $9.95. This was set in 2005. Well, now we shall leave. Again, this is a church that's open, so I found that this part of the country is very good for keeping its churches open. Oh, so it's been raining. So if we just go around to this side, we can actually see one of the original Norman windows with Roman brick. So I'm not sure, but it did say there's a medieval scratch dial here, so it could be that. So it's basically it's a sundial basically, and it would indicate time to go to mass. So you can see that most of this wall has got Roman brick inside it. So this amount would probably indicate a villa. Wow, that's the coin there, full of bricks. Just about everywhere you look. So now we're coming on to the Chancel. And you can see how they work on these windows nowadays, replacing the old medieval stone with new stone on the jambs, and that will weather in eventually. You can see a huge amount of flint rubble from the fields, and you can see also stone's just been utilised for the centuries. So now we're looking at the Chancel, the east side. This is quite interesting. Seems to be a big hole that's been patched up. I wonder what happened there. I did read that this perimeter wall follows the old boundary. For some reason it's got a hole in it. So now you can see how big this church is. It's very big. So now we're on the north side, and again you can see where the nave cuts into the chancel. Again, huge amount of bricks. It looks like a window in the Tudor period. And again, if you look above it, another Norman window. can see how the village wraps itself around this old plot of land. And this is unusual, a window made in oak. The only other one I saw was in Ingate stone. So it's really unusual. Here's the old north door. This is most likely where the lords of the manor, the Manors, etc. would come through. And again above it, another Norman window with Roman bricks. Huge brick in this building. I'm just wondering how big this villa was. It's quite interesting. Sometimes these grooves, from what I read, they can actually come from where they would sharpen swords, because it's believed that this stone is holy, and arrowheads right, so definitely been beaten by the weather. So St John's and Giles is very active within the community and carries out baptisms, weddings and funerals, and is open every day. Let's go and have a look. So thank you very much.